For 16 years, the Brown family children were the heart of one of TLC's most successful shows. Their birthdays, their heartbreaks, their awkward teenage years, their parents' divorces. All of it was content. All of it made money. The show ran for 20 seasons. Somebody got rich off of broadcasting these kids' lives. And recently, Gwendlyn Brown said something that reframes the entire enterprise. A claim about how little the children themselves were actually paid for all those years on camera. So tonight, I want to follow this thread because it leads to the most uncomfortable question this whole franchise raises. Were the Brown children stars of a hit show, or were they the unpaid product being sold? Let's talk about it. Let me start with what Gwendlyn actually put out there, and let me be careful about how I frame it. Gwendlyn made a public claim about the kids' compensation that surprised a lot of people, suggesting the children received far less than viewers might assume for a program built so heavily around them. I'm going to treat this as her claim, her statement, rather than a fully documented financial fact, because that's the responsible way to handle it. We don't have the contracts in front of us. What we have is one of the kids, now an adult, telling the public that the money the children saw did not match the scale of the show they carried. And even as a claim, that's explosive, because it forces a question the audience never really had to confront before. Here's why this lands so hard. When we watch a reality show about a family, we tend to assume everyone on camera is a willing, compensated participant. We picture the adults negotiating deals, signing contracts, getting paid. And for the adults, that's largely true. But the children didn't negotiate anything. They didn't sign up. They were born into a family that happened to have a television deal. And from their earliest years, their lives became the raw material of a commercial product. They had no say in it. And if Gwendlyn's claim is accurate, they didn't even get a meaningful share of the money their own childhoods generated. That's the heart of the discomfort. Let me put this in the broader context of child stars, because it's a conversation our culture has been having more and more. For decades, we celebrated child performers without thinking much about what the experience cost them, or whether they were fairly compensated and protected. In recent years, a lot of former child stars have come forward to talk about the darker side of growing up on camera. The lack of protections, the money that flowed to everyone but them, the psychological toll of having no privacy. Reality television kids are arguably even more vulnerable because, unlike scripted child actors, they often have fewer formal protections. And they're not playing a character, they're just being filmed living their actual lives. Gwendlyn's claim drops right into that larger reckoning. It's the sister wives version of a question our whole culture is finally asking. Think about what these particular kids actually gave to the show. They gave their real childhoods. Not performances, their actual lives. The cameras captured real birthdays, real fights, real grief, real coming-of-age moments. When sister wives needed emotional content, where did it come from? Often from the kids. Their struggles, their milestones, their family's impact on them. They were, in a very real sense, the emotional engine of the program. And if the engine of a hit show that ran for 20 seasons was undercompensated, that's not a small footnote. That's a significant injustice sitting at the foundation of the whole enterprise. Now, let me be fair, because there are reasonable counterpoints, and this channel doesn't do one-sided outrage. One counterpoint is that the children did receive benefits beyond a paycheck. A certain level of fame, opportunities, platforms they could later monetize themselves, as Gwendlyn herself has arguably done. Another is that family reality shows often structure compensation around the parents in the household, rather than individual children, which is standard, if questionable, industry practice. And a third is that we genuinely don't know the full financial picture, so we should be cautious about declaring exploitation based on one claim. All of that is fair. I'm not here to convict anyone on a single statement, but even granting all those caveats, the underlying question remains worth asking. And it's a question Gwendlyn has every right to raise as someone who actually lived it. Because here's the thing about benefits like fame and platform. Those aren't the same as fair compensation, and they came with enormous costs. Yes, some of the kids can leverage their notoriety now, but that notoriety was non-consensual. They didn't choose to be famous. And the fame came bundled with a total loss of privacy, public scrutiny of their most vulnerable moments, and a childhood that belonged, in part, to an audience. You can't just point to the upside of fame without acknowledging that it was imposed, not chosen, and that it carried real harm. Saying the kids got fame so they were compensated is a bit like saying someone was paid in a currency they never agreed to accept and couldn't spend until adulthood. if at all. Let me talk about what it means that it's Gwendlyn raising this, specifically because the messenger matters. Gwendlyn has become the family's most candid insider voice. She's the one willing to say the quiet parts out loud. So when she's the one making the pay claim, it carries a particular credibility. Not because she has documents, but because she's consistently been the one telling the audience the uncomfortable truths the show preferred to hide. She's not a disgruntled outsider speculating, she's an actual child of the show, now grown, looking back and telling us the math didn't add up. That insider perspective is exactly the kind of testimony that's hardest to dismiss, even when it's framed as a claim rather than proven fact. And I think this claim does something important, beyond the money itself. It retroactively changes how we, the audience, should feel about having watched. Because if these kids were undercompensated participants in their own lives, then every one of us who tuned in was, in a small way, part of the machine that profited from them. That's an uncomfortable thing to sit with, but I think it's worth sitting with. We didn't do anything wrong by watching a show, but the show's business model, if Gwendlyn is right, ran on the underpaid labor of children who couldn't consent. Acknowledging that doesn't mean we have to feel guilty for watching. It just means we should take seriously the voices of the kids now telling us what it cost them. Let me zoom out to the deepest irony of the whole Sister Wives premise in light of this. The show was always on its surface about family, about the bonds between these people, the love, the togetherness, the children at the center of it all. That was the emotional product being sold. And yet, if the children at that emotional center were the ones least fairly compensated, then the show was, in a sense, selling the image of family while undervaluing the actual family members who made the image possible. The kids were both the heart of the show and, allegedly, the least rewarded for it. That contradiction, the family that was monetized but whose youngest members didn't share fairly in the proceeds, is a pretty damning summary of what reality television can do to the people inside it. I want to be careful to keep the kids' humanity at the center of this, not just the dollars, because the real cost here was never only financial. Even if every child had been paid generously, there would still be the question of what it does to a person to grow up with no privacy, to have your hardest moments broadcast, to be a public figure before you were old enough to choose it. Money is one measure of fairness, but the deeper injustice, if there is one, is about consent and childhood itself. Gwendlyn's pay claim is really a doorway into that larger conversation about whether any child can truly be a fair participant in the commercialization of their own life. The money is just the most concrete way to talk about a much bigger question. So what do we do with all of this? I think we do exactly what Gwendlyn is inviting us to do, which is to look at the show we enjoyed with clearer eyes, to recognize that behind the entertainment were real children whose lives were the product, to take seriously their grown-up testimony about what that cost them, and to let it inform how we think about all these family reality shows, not just this one. We don't have to stop caring about the Browns or pretend we never watched. We just have to hold the knowledge that the kids at the center may not have been treated as fairly as the people profiting from them. That's not cancellation. That's just honesty about what we were watching. So when I step back and look at Gwendlyn's pay claim, here's what I see. I see one of the children, now grown, doing what children of reality TV are increasingly doing, looking back and naming what was taken and what wasn't given. I see a claim that, even held as a claim, forces an uncomfortable and necessary question about whether these kids were stars or products. And I see the deepest contradiction of the entire franchise laid bare, that a show all about family may have undervalued the very family members who gave it its heart. Whatever the exact dollar figures turn out to be, Gwendlyn has done something valuable. She's made us ask who really paid for the Brown family's fame, and the answer, increasingly, looks like it was the kids. Let me explain the mechanics of how money typically flows on a family reality show, because it helps you understand how kids can end up shortchanged even when nobody sets out to cheat them. On most of these programs, the network pays the family as a unit, or pays the parents, who are the adults signing the contracts. The money goes into the household. From there, it's up to the parents how it's distributed, or whether it's distributed to the children at all. There's often no requirement that individual kids receive a set share, the way child actors in scripted productions are supposed to have protections like trust accounts. So a child can appear in hundreds of episodes, be central to the show's appeal, and never see a dedicated paycheck, because the system was never built to pay them directly. It was built to pay the adults. And in a large family, that means a lot of kids generating value that flows right past them. Now apply that to a household with this many children, and the math gets even starker. Whatever the family was paid had to support an enormous household. So even if the parents distributed money fairly within the family, it was being spread across a huge number of people and a huge number of needs. The kids might have benefited indirectly through housing and food and the family's lifestyle without ever receiving anything resembling fair individual compensation for being on camera. And here's the rub. Indirect benefit isn't the same as being paid. Every kid in America gets housed and fed by their parents without being filmed for a hit show. The question isn't whether the Brown kids were provided for as children, it's whether they were compensated as the on-screen talent that they unmistakably were. Those are two completely different things, and the show, like most, seems to have treated them as one. Think about what fair compensation could have meant for these kids. Concretely, imagine if each child who appeared regularly had a portion of the show's earnings set aside in their name, growing over 16 years, available to them when they reached adulthood. That money could have funded college without debt. It could have been a down payment on a first home. It could have been the freedom to start a life without financial pressure, a cushion that acknowledged they gave their childhoods to a commercial product. Instead, if Gwendlyn's claim holds, many of them aged out of the show and into adulthood without that foundation, having given far more to the enterprise than they ever got back. The opportunity cost there is staggering. They didn't just miss a paycheck. They missed the head start that paycheck could have become. And there's a consent dimension that goes even deeper than money, which is really what makes this a child welfare conversation, and not just a labor one. A scripted child actor at least exists within a framework that, however imperfectly, recognizes them as a worker with rights. A reality kid is in murkier territory. They're not playing a role, so are they working? They're just living, but their living is the product, so aren't they? This ambiguity is exactly what leaves these kids unprotected. They fall into a gap where they're too real to be treated as actors and too commercialized to be treated as ordinary kids. Gwendlyn's claim shines a light right into that gap. And the uncomfortable truth is that our laws and norms still haven't caught up to protect the children growing up inside this genre. I find myself wondering how the other Brown kids feel about Gwendlyn raising this, because it can't be simple for them. Some may agree wholeheartedly and be grateful she said it. Others may feel more conflicted, perhaps because they have warmer feelings about the experience, or because they don't want to publicly air the family's financial laundry, or because they're navigating their own complicated relationship with the money and the fame. A claim like this can divide siblings, because it forces each of them to decide whether they see their shared childhood as a gift, an exploitation, or some painful mix of both. Gwendlyn, by speaking, has put that question on the table for all of them, whether they wanted it there or not. That's part of what it means to be the family's truth teller. You make everyone else reckon with the truth too. Let me return to us, the audience, because I think we have a small but real role in this reckoning. For 16 years, the show worked because people watched. The ratings, the engagement, the cultural conversation, all of it gave the show its value. And that value is what generated the money. So, in the most indirect way imaginable, the audience's attention is part of the economic engine that, if Gwendlyn is right, ran on undercompensated kids. I'm not saying anyone should feel guilty for watching a TV show. That would be absurd. But I do think there's value in letting this claim change how we engage going forward. We can be the kind of audience that takes the grown kids' testimony seriously, that supports them telling their own stories on their own terms now, and that's a little more skeptical of the next family reality show that puts children at its center. Awareness is the least we can offer. And here's something I genuinely admire about Gwendlyn in all this. Whatever she didn't get as a child, she has taken the one asset the show did leave her, a platform, and turned it into something she controls. She uses her voice now on her own terms, to tell her own truths, including this uncomfortable one about money. There's a kind of justice in that, even if it's incomplete. The show took a lot from these kids, and gave them a complicated, non-consensual fame in return. Gwendlyn has taken that fame and repurposed it into a tool for honesty and self-advocacy. She's making the platform serve her instead of the other way around. It doesn't undo whatever unfairness happened, but it's a powerful example of a former reality kid refusing to be only a victim of the machine, and instead becoming someone who can hold it accountable. The last thing I'll say before we wrap is that this claim, more than almost anything else, marks the true end of an era for this family. For years, the kids were objects in the family story, things that happened to the Browns, content the show generated. Now they're adults with their own voices, their own analyses, and their own grievances, and they're using those voices to talk back to the very enterprise that raised them. Gwendolyn's pay claim is part of that turning. The product is now talking back. The kids who were once just footage are now witnesses. And witnesses, unlike footage, can't be edited. They tell you what really happened, whether the family or the network or the audience wants to hear it or not. So I'll put it to you now, because I really want your honest take. Do you think the Brown children were fairly compensated for 16 years of their lives on camera? Or do you think Gwendolyn's claim points to something genuinely unfair? And here's the bigger question for the comments. Should reality TV have stronger protections for the children who grow up on these shows? Tell me where you land, because this is a conversation that goes way beyond one family, and I read every comment. If you want me to do a full breakdown of how reality TV typically handles and mishandles the kids who grow up on camera, let me know, and I'll build that next. And if you appreciate that we ask the hard questions while still being fair and careful with the facts, then do me a favor and subscribe, because that balance is exactly what we're going for here. And there's so much more of this story still to dig into.